Jamal, a 12-year-old black boy, rode his shiny red bicycle with pure joy, weaving in and out of the neighborhood streets. The bike gleamed under the sunlight, and Jamal's heart swelled with pride as he rode. It wasn't just a bike. It was a symbol of his mother's hard work, of the sacrifices she made working extra shifts to give him a life of little luxuries. It was the first thing Jamal had ever owned that was truly his, something he could call his own. But just as Jamal was feeling on top of the world, the peace of the moment was shattered by the loud sound of a police cruiser pulling up beside him. He turned his head, confused, as Officer Daniels, a tough-looking white cop with a stern expression, stepped out of the vehicle. The officer sneered at him, his eyes scanning the bicycle with judgment. "Hey, kid," Officer Daniels barked, his voice rough. "Where'd you get that bike?" Jamal blinked in surprise, still gripping the handlebars tightly. "My mom bought it for me," he replied, his voice unsure but defensive. He didn't understand why the officer was questioning him. He hadn't done anything wrong. Officer Daniels crossed his arms and took a few steps closer, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, right. A kid like you can't afford something this nice." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat as he felt a pang of fear. What was this officer implying? Jamal wasn't rich, but his mother worked hard, and she had made sacrifices for him to have something special. But before he could respond, Officer Daniels took another step forward. With a sudden, brutal movement, Daniels ripped the bike from Jamal's hands, causing the young boy to stumble backward. "Consider it confiscated," Officer Daniels sneered. "If you want it back, tell your mommy to come down to the station." Jamal stood there, his hands still gripping the handlebars that were no longer in his control. His fists clenched at his sides, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. The officer tossed the bike into the cruiser with a laugh, as if it were nothing more than a toy. Then, without another word, he got into his vehicle and drove away, leaving Jamal standing alone, humiliated, in the middle of the street. Jamal looked down at the ground, the weight of the moment sinking in. The joy he had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a storm of confusion and anger. Why had he been treated like that? What was wrong with his bike? The young boy stood still for a long time, trying to collect himself. His mother had worked so hard for this moment, and now it felt like it had been stolen away without a second thought. Jamal walked home slowly, his shoulders hunched in defeat. His hands were still trembling from the encounter, and the feeling of humiliation lingered like a heavy weight on his chest. The shiny red bicycle that had been his pride and joy was now gone, taken away by Officer Daniels without explanation. Jamal tried to shake off the hurt, but the injustice of it all gnawed at him. As he approached the front door, his mother, Monica, a well-dressed black woman in her 40s, stepped out of the kitchen. She looked up as soon as Jamal walked through the door, immediately noticing his downcast expression and the absence of his bike. "Jamal?" Monica's voice was soft but concerned. "Where's your bike?" Jamal hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain what had happened. But then he remembered the sting of the officer's words, the way he had taken the bike with such callousness. He couldn't keep it from her. With a deep sigh, he let the truth spill out. "Mom, the officer, he took it." Jamal's voice was shaky. "He said it was confiscated." Monica's eyes narrowed in confusion, and she stepped forward, placing her hands on her hips. "He took it for no reason?" she asked, her voice tightening with disbelief. Jamal nodded, his throat tight. "He said we could get it back at the station, but he didn't even explain why. He just took it." Monica's face hardened, her brow furrowing with anger. Her instincts as a mother kicked in, and she felt the fire of injustice spark deep inside her. She had raised Jamal with love and care, teaching him to respect others and demand respect in return. But this was different. This wasn't just disrespect. It was cruelty, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Monica exhaled deeply, her fists clenched in resolve. She turned toward the counter, grabbing her car keys with swift precision. "Oh," "We're getting it back, all right," she said firmly, her voice laced with determination. Jamal looked up, startled by the fierce energy in his mother's voice. "Mom, what are you going to do?" Monica's lips curled into a tight smile, a look of pure confidence on her face. "You'll see, baby," she said, her voice softening. "I'm not going to let anyone treat you like that. Not on my watch." As she headed toward the door, Jamal couldn't help but feel a surge of pride in his mother. She wasn't just going to let this go. She wasn't just going to be another person who turned away when injustice happened. She was going to fight for him, and for the first time that day, Jamal felt a glimmer of hope. The anger in his mother's eyes told him that things were about to change. They weren't going to just let Officer Daniels get away with it. As the car engine hummed to life, Jamal sat back in his seat, watching his mother drive with purpose. He didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but one thing was certain: Monica wasn't backing down, and neither was he. The tension in the car was palpable as they made their way to the police station. Jamal stared out the window, his hands still tingling from the memory of the bike being ripped from his grasp. The feeling of helplessness, the sting of being wrongly accused, and the weight of racism. It was all there, swirling inside him. But he wasn't alone. Monica was with him, and she wasn't going to let anyone take his dignity. When they finally reached the station, Monica parked the car with a sharp turn. Jamal watched as she took a deep breath, adjusting her posture. She was calm, but there was an intensity about her that made it clear she meant business. He could see it in the way she held herself. His mother wasn't just going to be another person ignored. She was going to make sure the officer knew just how wrong he was. Jamal couldn't help but feel a little nervous as they walked toward the door. But with his mother by his side, he felt the strength to face whatever came next. This was no longer just about a stolen bike. It was about standing up for what was right. Monica took a deep breath as she walked inside the station, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. She was ready for this fight, and nothing was going to stop her. The injustice Jamal had faced would be met with the power of a mother's love, and that was all the strength she needed. The wheels of the car rolled to a stop outside the police station. The air was thick with tension, and Monica's hands gripped the steering wheel with determination. Jamal sat silently beside her, feeling a mixture of nerves and hope. They had arrived, but what would happen next? Monica was calm, composed, and ready. Jamal, on the other hand, was still processing the humiliation he had endured earlier that day. He couldn't understand why Officer Daniels had treated him like that. He wasn't a thief, he wasn't trouble. He just wanted to ride his bike, the one his mother had worked so hard to buy for him. Monica turned to Jamal as the car door clicked open. "Stay close, all right?" she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of intensity. "I'm not leaving until we get your bike back." Jamal nodded, his nerves calming just a little as he saw the determined glint in his mother's eyes. He had always admired her strength, but today he saw just how powerful it could be when she was fighting for him. They walked through the station's doors together. The noise of the busy office echoed in their ears, but Monica's confidence filled the space between them like an invisible shield. She didn't hesitate as she approached the receptionist at the desk. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a neutral expression, looked up, greeting Monica with a polite smile. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Monica's response was calm but unwavering. "Yes, I need to speak with Officer Daniels about a bicycle he stole from my son." The receptionist hesitated, sensing the seriousness in Monica's tone. She exchanged a quick glance with another officer, then picked up the phone, dialing quickly. Officer Daniels?" the receptionist said into the receiver. "You have someone asking about a bike." Monica stood with her arms folded, her eyes steady and unblinking. Jamal stood beside her, trying to hide the knots in his stomach. He had never seen his mother like this, so fierce, so in control. Whatever was about to happen, he knew she wasn't backing down. A few minutes passed, and then the door to the back office swung open. Officer Daniels strolled in, his usual smirk plastered across his face. He looked at Monica and Jamal for a moment before his eyes flicked back to the receptionist. "Let me guess. You're the kid's mom," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Monica's gaze never wavered. She stood taller, folding her arms tighter across her chest. "Where's my son's bike?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. Daniels chuckled, leaning casually against the front desk, his posture relaxed, as if he held all the power in the situation. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't take orders from you." Monica's lips curved into a small, knowing smirk. She wasn't angry, but there was a calm authority in her expression that made Daniels pause for just a second. "Oh, you will," she said, her tone cool and controlled. Before he could respond, Monica reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek business card. She slapped it onto the counter in front of him with a small thud. Daniels's eyes flicked down at the card. The color drained from his face as he read the name printed in bold letters. His smirk faltered, and his eyes widened in shock as he recognized the name. Monica stood tall, watching the effect her card had on him. The realization hit Daniels like a slap in the face. The name on that card wasn't just any name. It was a name that commanded respect, power, and influence. And in that moment, Monica knew she had just turned the tables. Daniels picked up the card slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. He stared at it for a moment, then back at Monica. His mouth opened and closed as he tried to process what was happening. You're," he stammered. Monica stood her ground, a quiet force of nature. "Yes," she said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "I'm the chief of police in this district, and I do not tolerate this kind of behavior." Jamal watched as the situation shifted in a heartbeat. The bully, the officer who had humiliated him, who had taken his bike without a second thought, was now the one standing in fear. He could see the shock and fear in Daniels's eyes, the sudden shift in his demeanor. For once, the tables had turned, and it felt like justice was finally being served. The room had grown silent as the other officers in the station watched the exchange. Some of them seemed unsure of how to react, but none of them dared to interfere. Daniels stood frozen, caught between trying to salvage his pride and recognizing that he had made a grave mistake. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a look of anxiety as he processed the enormity of the situation. Monica's calm, steady gaze met his, and her next words were simple but powerful. "Now, I expect my son's bike to be returned immediately. If not, I'll make sure this is handled in a way you won't forget." The tension in the room was palpable, but Monica's confidence and authority were undeniable. She had not only called out the officer's actions, but had also shown him that he messed with the wrong family. Daniels, his face pale, stammered out a response, his voice shaky. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know." Monica didn't flinch. "Now you do," she replied, her voice firm, "and I suggest you think long and hard about how you treat people moving forward." The officer nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment as he turned away to retrieve the bike. Monica watched, her arms still crossed, as Daniels hurried out the door to the back office. Jamal stood beside her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had never seen his mother so strong, so commanding. In that moment, he understood what it meant to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, and to never let anyone make you feel inferior. As the officer returned with the bike, Monica took it from him without a word, placing it gently in Jamal's hands. She smiled at her son, her eyes full of pride. "Here you go, Jamal," she said softly. "Your bike." Jamal looked up at her, overwhelmed with emotion. He could feel the tears welling in his eyes, but he blinked them back. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. Monica smiled at him, a warm, reassuring smile that said everything without needing to say another word. Monica stood her ground, a quiet force of nature. "Yes," she said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "I'm the chief of police in this district, and I do not tolerate this kind of behavior." Jamal watched as the situation shifted in a heartbeat. The bully, the officer who had humiliated him, who had taken his bike without a second thought, was now the one standing in fear. He could see the shock and fear in Daniels's eyes, the sudden shift in his demeanor. For once, the tables had turned, and it felt like justice was finally being served. The room had grown silent as the other officers in the station watched the exchange. Some of them seemed unsure of how to react, but none of them dared to interfere. Daniels stood frozen, caught between trying to salvage his pride and recognizing that he had made a grave mistake. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a look of anxiety as he processed the enormity of the situation. Monica's calm, steady gaze met his, and her next words were simple but powerful. "Now, I expect my son's bike to be returned immediately. If not, I'll make sure this is handled in a way you won't forget." The tension in the room was palpable, but Monica's confidence and authority were undeniable. She had not only called out the officer's actions, but had also shown him that he messed with the wrong family. Daniels, his face pale, stammered out a response, his voice shaky. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know." Monica didn't flinch. "Now you do," she replied, her voice firm, "and I suggest you think long and hard about how you treat people moving forward." The officer nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment as he turned away to retrieve the bike. Monica watched, her arms still crossed, as Daniels hurried out the door to the back office. Jamal stood beside her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had never seen his mother so strong, so commanding. In that moment, he understood what it meant to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, and to never let anyone make you feel inferior. As the officer returned with the bike, Monica took it from him without a word, placing it gently in Jamal's hands. She smiled at her son, her eyes full of pride. "Here you go, Jamal," she said softly. "Your bike." Jamal looked up at her, overwhelmed with emotion. He could feel the tears welling in his eyes, but he blinked them back. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. Monica smiled at him, a warm, reassuring smile that said everything without needing to say another word. Monica raised her hand, silencing him before he could finish. Her eyes were cold, cutting through his feeble defense. "Save it," she said. "You've got two options. Either return my son's bike now, or I launch a full investigation into your history. And trust me, I will find something." Daniels hesitated, panic flashing in his eyes. He looked at the receptionist, who now seemed paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The whole room felt like it was closing in on him. The weight of his actions was finally catching up, and it was too much to ignore. "Get the kid's bike. Now," Daniels ordered, his voice trembling. His earlier bravado was completely gone, replaced by fear and humiliation. It was clear that the power dynamic had shifted completely, and now he was the one scrambling. Monica stood tall, her expression calm but firm. She didn't need to say more. Daniels knew his options were limited, and his best chance at saving face was to comply. He hurriedly turned to the back office, his steps quick and uneasy, while Monica stood still, watching him, her arms crossed. Jamal, who had been standing quietly beside his mother, felt a surge of pride swell inside him. He had watched his mother take control of the situation with unwavering confidence. She was no longer just his mom. She was a force to be reckoned with. As Daniels returned with the bike, the tension in the room was palpable. The security guard who had been standing nearby looked uncomfortable, not daring to say a word. Everyone in the station seemed to be holding their breath. Daniels placed the bike down in front of Monica, his face flushed with embarrassment. He couldn't meet her gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor. Here's the bike, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Monica didn't flinch. She took the bike, her gaze never leaving Daniel's. Thank you, she said, her voice sharp and final. There was no satisfaction in her tone, just a quiet resolve that this was the way things should have been from the start. She turned to Jamal, giving him a small smile. Let's go home, baby, she said, her voice softening as she handed the bike back to him. Jamal's eyes widened with gratitude and admiration. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. He was proud of his mother, and in that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. As they turned to leave, the receptionist finally broke the silence. "Ma'am," she called, her voice hesitant but respectful. I just want to say thank you for standing up for what's right." Monica turned back to her, giving her a nod of acknowledgement. "It's my job," she said simply, "and it's what anyone should do." With that, they walked out of the station, leaving the chaos and the injustice behind. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the street. Jamal looked up at his mother, his heart full. He couldn't wait to ride his bike again, this time with the pride of knowing he had someone who would always stand up for him, no matter what. As they headed home, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the stillness of the evening, marking the end of one battle and the beginning of a stronger, more empowered future. A few minutes later, Daniels wheeled Jamal's red bicycle out of the back office, his hands visibly shaking. His face was pale, and the smugness he once carried had completely disappeared. He forced a smile as he handed the bike over. "Here you go, kid. No hard feelings, right?" His voice trembled as he spoke, trying to hide the fear creeping in. Jamal glanced at his mother, his brow furrowed in confusion. Monica stared Daniels down with an icy intensity, her eyes cold and unblinking. "Hard feelings?" Monica's voice was firm, cutting through the tension in the room. "Officer Daniels, you're about to have a lot of hard feelings." Daniels stammered, unsure of how to respond. Wait, no, But Monica wasn't finished. She turned to the receptionist, her voice calm but laced with authority. "I want a full report on this officer's complaints on my desk by tomorrow morning." The receptionist nodded quickly, her face a mixture of fear and respect. Daniels, now visibly sweating, turned to Monica with wide eyes. "No, please." Monica didn't even look at him. She turned her attention to Jamal, handing him the bike with a warm smile. "Let's go, baby. Justice has been served." Jamal took the bike from his mother's hands, his face lighting up as he glanced at it with a sense of pride. He smiled back at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. Together, they walked out of the station, leaving Officer Daniels behind, still standing there, now a mere shadow of his former self. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows on the pavement as Jamal hopped on his bike, his feet pushing the pedals with energy and joy. He was free, and more than that. He had learned what it meant to stand up for himself, to not let anyone take what was rightfully his. He looked back at his mother, who smiled proudly, watching him ride with newfound confidence. Meanwhile, back inside the police station, Daniels sat at his desk, his head in his hands, knowing full well that his career was over. He had underestimated the power of standing up for what was right, and now he would have to face the consequences. Jamal rode his bike down the street, smiling widely as he passed by. The wind whipped through his hair, and for the first time in a long while, he felt completely at peace. His mother had done more than just get his bike back. She had shown him the power of justice, of standing strong in the face of adversity. It was a new beginning, and Jamal knew that no matter what happened, he had his mother by his side, ready to protect him and fight for what was right. As the camera pulled back, capturing Jamal riding into the distance, Daniels sat at his desk, staring at the screen in front of him, knowing that his world was forever changed. His career was done, and the shame he now carried would follow him for a long time.